Hey BeatStars community, my name is Sam and I'm a music producer from the UK. I've teamed up with BeatStars to bring you a 3-part video series on how you can produce Pop Smoke type drill beats. If you are a producer, artist or anybody interested in the modern music industry, I highly recommend that you subscribe to the channel and hit the notifications bell so that you're updated whenever a video like this comes out. So this is the 3rd video part of the series. In the previous 2 videos, I show you how you can make a melody, a bass line, and a drum pattern, just like you would find in a Pop Smoke drill type beat. Make sure you watch the previous 2 before this one, because I'll provide some really helpful music production tips and tricks. In the video today, I'm going to be organizing the project, mixing it, mastering it, and then exporting it all out so that it's ready to be uploaded to BeatStars. So I'll be going over the finishing touches, so this beat is ready to be going out into the public domain. This is how it sounds so far. So as you heard, the full beat is pretty much finished, and I'm quite happy with how it sounds. However, the sounds need to be cleaned up using EQ and compression, as well as some other processing effects to get it sounding punchy, warm, silky and smooth. But before all this, I need to carry out some basic project admin to make sure that my workflow is efficient when I come to mix it. This leads me into pro tip number 1. Pro tip number 1. Organize your project before mixing. So the first thing I'm going to do is put the tracks into the order that I'm used to. I generally start from the top and work my way down, and I go in the order of 808s or basses, then the drums, and then the melodic instruments. So I'm going to do that now. I'm going to put the 808s at the top, followed by the grind bass, followed by the drums, and the remaining parts are all of the melodic parts. The next thing I'm going to do is color the tracks, as this helps me see where things are. To do this, I click on the track. So I'm click on the 808s, press Option and C to bring up the color menu, and then change the color into a blue. This will help me identify exactly where the bass is when I want to mix it, and help me reach for it quicker. Now I can just use the down key just to go through the instruments and change the color of each one. Obviously this has no effect on the sound, but it helps me make quicker mixing choices and decisions, as I'm able to find the instruments a lot quicker. If I color code, then I can relate each color to a different instrument. So the next one I'm going to do in another shade of blue. Drums, I'm going to start from red and work my way through. Chords, I'm going to start with from pink. Okay, so I've now coloured all of my tracks. The next thing that I can go on to do to help me identify where things are is to use instrument icons. To do this, I'm going to zoom in and right click on the icon to change how it looks. So you've got a range of different instruments, such as bass, grind bass, kick. Okay, so now I've included instrument icons for each track. Now I'm going to go through and make sure that they're all named correctly. This is an essential step to make sure that when I go to export it, Logic will name all of those files correctly. Gone through and coloured each track, given them an icon, and I've named them properly. So now I'm going to start putting things into groups using buses and track stacks. As you can see here, the drums are already in their own group, so I won't need to do anything there. However, the melodies aren't yet. So what I'm going to do is highlight each of the tracks by holding down Command, and then right clicking on one of the tracks and going to create track stack. I'm going to choose a summing stack in this case, as I want to be able to apply processing. Now you can see that they're in their own group or their own bus group. I'm going to label this melodies. So you may have noticed that I use capital letters for each of the track stacks or the groups, and then for the instruments inside I use lowercase. This is to help me see the difference when things are exported. The next thing I'm going to do is press X on my keyboard to bring up the mixer. I'm now going to add in some auxiliary tracks that we can send our project to, such as a reverb, a delay, and a parallel compression channel. To do this, go to Options, Create New Auxiliary Track. I'm going to label them. For this one, reverb, this one's delay, and this one's our parallel compression. I'm going to choose a bus that I haven't already used, so I'm going to make this one bus 10, this one bus 11, and bus 12. It doesn't matter what number you choose as long as the bus hasn't already been taken by one of the other instruments. Then I'm going to highlight my stem tracks or my bus groups and send these to the reverb, delay, and the parallel compression channels. I'm going to start by putting a space designer on the reverb channel. So now that when I turn up the dials, you should hear the reverb start to kick in. If I turn this up on the channel as well, so that we can hear it. I find that sending your tracks to 1 or 2 reverb effects is better than adding reverb to each channel. This is because adding reverb to each channel will take up way more CPU power and actually starts to sound unrealistic as you're combining lots of different spaces. Whereas if you send all of your tracks to 1 reverb, it's more of a feeling of a group performing in a room, just like a live performance would be. Reverb adds depth and space to your mix, so I'm going to be blending that in a little bit later. The next thing I'm going to set up is a delay channel, in which I'm going to put a stereo delay. Creating even more ambience and stereo width in the mix. This is again something that I'll add a bit later. And then the final thing is the compression. So I'm going to use a compressor on this channel by clicking the shortcut on this strip here, setting a high ratio, a very low threshold, auto release off, turn the auto gain off too, control the attack and release so that it plays in time with my music. So I'm going to send all of the tracks equal amounts to the parallel compression. Match the gain before and after. The aim here is to really squash the mix on the parallel compression channel, as I'm going to be blending a little bit this back in. Okay, that should do for now, and I'm going to pull this down and blend it in to taste. Now that my reverb, delay and parallel compression channels are set up, I'm going to go in and actually start working on the mix itself. I can come back to these effects later. So the next stage is to start leveling the beat, and I find that it's best to do this starting from scratch, so to bring it down all of the faders so that you can begin your mix from the beginning. I suggest you save your project before doing this because you may end up liking the mix you had previously, but this is a good method when you've been working on a project quite a long time and you've kind of lost the ability to listen objectively, and this just helps you start from a fresh slate. I'm going to save it, and then I'm going to press Command and A and bring down all of the tracks. Remember that bringing the faders down will also bring the stereo out and master faders down, so we need to make sure those go back up again, including the melody bus and the drum bus. The next thing I'm going to do is add a gain plugin to the stereo out channel. The reason why I'm using a gain plugin is to switch mono on and off so that I can listen to the mix in stereo and in mono, and this will help me make some important decisions when it comes to EQ and compression and finding spaces in the mix for all of the instruments to sit. The idea here is that if your mix sounds good in mono, it will definitely sound really nice when it opens out into stereo. Okay, I'm now ready to start leveling my beat. When leveling beats, I generally tend to start with the low end, so the kick and the 808, to make sure that they're working together in terms of volume. Arguably, the kick is the loudest and most punchy instrument in a drill beat. This is why I mix the kick first, as the loudness of everything else will be decided by the level of the kick. It's good practice to find an area of your mix where all of the instruments are playing, so that you can level them while they're all playing. Remember, sometimes it might be worth going into the quick sampler to make some edits to the actual sample itself. Constantly checking back to and from the stereo out channel to make sure that I'm not clipping and going over zero. I'm trying to leave some headroom, which is space for other instruments to fit inside without clipping. For now, I'm going to set the kick at around -6 decibels, and this leaves around -7.2 decibels of headroom. Next up is the 808, so I'm going to click on the 808 channel and go into the sampler. I'm going to sidechain this off from the kick, so I'm going to find the kick, instrument 28, and then increase some of the attack in the envelope. This kind of adds a little fade to the beginning of the 808, which allows the kick to come through with the punch and then is followed by the tail of the 808. Okay, so I've now leveled the 808 with the kick drum. Now I'm going to add in the grind bass. Whilst I want the 808 and the kick drum to remain fairly mono and sound like they're in the middle, with the grind bass, I want some of the higher frequency content to go left and right. For this, I'm going to use a tremolo. So click on Audio Effects, Modulation, Tremolo. Remember to take your mix out of mono again by switching off the gain plugin for a second. Okay, I'm happy with that. I'm going to switch the gain plugin back on again as I'm going to move on to the other drum elements. For the hi-hat, I've removed some of the tail in the sample, as there was this annoying high frequency ringing each time it was played. So I'm going to remove that. I'm also going to add a little bit of attack to soften the hi-hat slightly. Too much and the hi-hat loses volume. And this just makes sure that the hi-hat isn't too loud and cutting when it's played through smaller speakers. For the left hi-hat, I pitched it down by 2 semitones and adjusted the tail. For the stomp channel, this is the perfect example of something that could be sent to the reverb to create a sense of ambience, space, and a 3D quality to the sound. First, I'm going to mix it in. I've now chosen bus 10 on that channel as I'm going to blend in some reverb. Next up is the gunshot. I'm also going to send this one to the reverb. Going to try a touch of delay on the gunshot as well to see how that sounds. Next up is the reverse cymbal, which comes just before this bar here, followed by the riser. Going to add some delay to the beat. As you can see, I've only added reverb and delay onto some of the drum elements. I tend to avoid putting too much reverb on kicks and snares, as I want them to remain the punchy elements in the mix. It's now time to start mixing in the melody parts. Okay, so I've leveled the beat and now it's time to start adding effects such as EQ and compression to the master chain. To do this, I'm going to press X on my keyboard and move over to the master chain. The first process that I'm going to add is EQ. So I'm going to choose a linear phase EQ in dual mono. This is a slightly more advanced technique where I'm going to be using mid-side processing. So instead of left and right channels, I want to go to the cog and choose mid and sides and go to the mid channel. I'm going to add a low pass, a high pass, and a small dip around 2, 3, and 400 to clean out some of the muddy frequencies. I'm gonna make that a steep curve and turn that to around 25 Hertz, just to cut off all of the low frequency rumble that we can't hear as humans anyway. Then I'm going to add a low pass filter and move this up to around 19,000 to 20,000 Hertz. The more you bring this in, the more lo-fi and warm your master will sound. But you'll start to cut off some of the high frequencies, such as the hi-hats. I'm now going to attenuate the frequencies around 200, 300 and 400, just to clean out some of the mud. So that's the middle channel EQ'd. I'm now going to EQ the sides. And the main thing that I'm going to do here, add a low shelf to pretty much cut out all of the frequencies below 100 Hertz. And this will mono the low end of my entire mix. The next thing I'm going to do is add a compressor onto the entire mix. This is just to control and tame some of the transients caused by the kick and snare and essentially glue the piece into one. I'm going to reset the parameters on the compressor. For the mix bus, a good place to start is a ratio of 2:1 or 4:1. And I just want to see the needle move in time with my kicks and snares. This is what I'm looking for. So that it just catches those peaks and brings them in ever so slightly with the rest of my mix. If you can really hear the compression working, you're probably adding too much. I'm keeping an attack time of around 10 milliseconds, as I still want to allow the punch of the transients to come through. You can see on the graph how it's only just ever so slightly catching the transients of the kick. Now I'm going to go through the different circuitry emulations to see which one I like the most. Okay, so I quite like the vintage VCA circuitry emulation, and I'm going to add a little bit of soft distortion. This has added just a little bit of saturation that's brought up the overall perceived volume. To bring out some more smack in the transients of the drums, I'm going to use a plugin called Enveloper. This is under the dynamics section. What I'm going to do here is design the transient to come in ever so slightly harder by bringing up this gain. You can see that it brings up the beginning of the sound. Now that I've enhanced the smack of the drums, I'm going to rein it back in again using some very slight compression. Reset the parameters. I want the smallest amount of compression for the drums, because I really don't want to be taking away the punch and the transient. I've also chosen to use clip distortion to bring up the overall perceived volume of the drums. Pro tip number 2, use soft clipping to bring out the punch in your drum bus and in your master chain. In other DAWs you have dedicated soft clipping plugins, which we don't have yet in Logic, but there's a workaround which sounds really good. So to do this, go to your drum group and open an instance of the bit crusher, which is under distortion. Now we're not going to be using it as a bit crushing effect. Instead we're going to use it as a clipping plugin. So I'm going to turn the drive down for now, the resolution back up to 24 bits, leave the downsampling to 1 times, and have the mix on 100. Now the part that's the most important is here, where I bring the clip level down to somewhere below 0. Now the more you bring this down, the more the clipper will square out the waveform, which will add more crunch and more distortion. So I'm going to bring the clip level down to -0.4 and then just drive it. Clipping your drum bus will add punchiness, it will increase the perceived level, and it won't let it go above 0 decibels. I'm I'm also going to add Bit Crusher to the master chain to add some clipping there as well. This time I'm going even more subtler as it's affecting the entire mix. Next I'm going to add some sidechain compression to the 808 so that it ducks when the kick hits. To do this, I'm going to add a compressor. And I'm going to sidechain this off of the kick. And find a part where both the kick and the 808 are playing together. Next I'm going to use match EQ. I'm also going to sidechain the match EQ from the kick so that I can reference the frequencies of the kick and then do the opposite EQ curve on the 808 to help bring out the frequencies so that the frequencies of the kick and the 808 aren't masking each other. So you can see there, that's the frequency curve of the kick, and I'm going to match that with the bass, which looks like that. I'm then going to bring this down to do the opposite curve very subtly on the 808. The last thing I'm going to add is some overdrive saturation to the 808. Moving on to the melodies, I'm going to add an EQ to cut out all of the low frequency information. The bass and the kick drum are taking care of that. I'm also going to add some sidechain compression from the kick too, so that it ducks every time there's a kick. This really helps glue the track into one, as everything is kind of activated from the kick and it will all move in time with the kick. So it's good for enhancing the dynamics and the rhythm of the track. It also makes the kick sound louder and punchier without even having to turn it up or do anything to the kick itself, as everything around it is being carved out of the mix as the kick hits. One last thing that I'm going to try for fun is to use the remix effects to enhance the drop. To do this, I'm going to go to the master channel, include multi-effects, remix effects, and the kind of effect that I'm looking for will sound like this. But there are other things you can do using the remix effects, such as the vinyl stop. So you can find this if you press X and go to the end, right click the channel and show output track. This will now put the stereo out channel in your arrangement view. Then I'm going to press A on the keyboard to bring up the automation menu. Now we could draw this in using the mouse, but we could play this in whilst the track is playing, which is the more natural option. So I'm going to go to Touch, open the Remix Effects plugin, play the track, and automate it as it goes. And then I'm going to add the stop effect as well. I held on to that slightly too long, so I can go in and adjust that on here. You must remember to turn touch back off again, because anything you do with this track after that will be recorded as automation, and this can be very destructive to the project, so you must remember to turn this off. Okay, so I'm almost at the final step now, where I'm going to bounce the tracks into stems, add one final level of processing, increase the loudness, and export it out so that it can be uploaded to BeatStars. First, I'm going to save the project as a new file called the mix. This is a really important step because when you bounce the tracks, you'll lose all of the MIDI information that you've created when you made the beat. So it's best to save this as a new project so that you have both the project with all of the instruments and the MIDI files and another project with the mix down on it. Before I go to bounce, I'm going to go to my mixer and make tracks from my reverb, my delay, and the parallel compression so that they are in the arrangement window as well, and so that they get included in the bounce down of the mix. Go to File, Bounce, and replace all tracks. Okay, so I'm at the final stage of the mix down now, and I have all of my tracks bounced in place. What I'm going to do next is find the group stems, such as the 808, the grime bass, the drums, and the melody channel, so that they're all together, including the reverb, delay, and parallel compression, and bring these to the top. I'm then going to mute off all the other channels as I don't want to be listening to these. I just want to be listening to the group stems. I'm then going to add a final layer of polish on the top using a vintage EQ. I'm going to go to EQ and choose a console EQ. This is to emulate the sound of the mix going through a mixing desk, which is known as analog summing. However, I'm doing this in the box in this case. To do this, I'm just going to use a simple preset. So for the 808, I'm going to choose like a bass preset, such as a synth bass. See what else they got. So before, you can hear the mix sound like this. And the console EQ emulation just adds a little bit more weight and a little bit more depth and body to the sounds. I'm also going to use some additive EQ on the stereo out channel as well. For this, I'm going to go to the vintage EQ and the vintage graphic EQ. Little boost around 2000 Hz. As the ear is quite sensitive around this region, just a small push will bring out a little bit of perceived loudness on the entire mix. But it's important not to do too much. So in this case, 1 decibel is more than enough, so I'm just going to keep it like that. So I'm highlighting all of the stems or the groups and bringing them down by like 1 decibel, 2 decibels. It's really important to leave some headroom on the stereo out channel on an instrumental beat. This is to leave some space for a vocal and some headroom so that it can be mastered to an industry competitive loudness level. This beat is now ready to be bounced. It's the unmastered version that has space for a vocal and for mastering. To do that, I'm going to go to the BNC button here, choose PCM, a file format wave, the same sample rate as the project, normalize off, and no dithering in this situation here. I'm going to go OK, and I'm going to call it, this is the mix, and bounce that. Now the issue with uploading this one to BeatStars is that it's not going to be very loud against all of the other beats on the platform. So BeatStars has this really useful option where you can upload a mastered mix to be streamed as well. So that when somebody is interested in buying the beat, they get both the mastered tagged MP3 as well as the unmastered untagged WAV file. I'll show you how you can do this. So I'm going to move the multimeter down to leave space to add an adaptive limiter. I'm going to use this to add some more volume to the overall master. Whilst adding the volume, I'm going to be checking the analyzer. Okay, I've added about 2 to 3 decibels of volume. It's now ready to be bounced. I'm going to include the MP3 file with this one. Make sure the bit rate is high quality at 320 kilobits per second. And OK. Going to change the name of this one to master, as it's had essentially a mastering process added to it. Finally, I'm going to export all of the stems. So to do this, I'm going to unmute all of the channels and unsolo all of the stems. Then going to go to File, Export, all tracks as audio files. I'm going to create a new folder. I'm going to export the cycle range, as this is set up with the yellow cycle range. I'm going to save them in a WAV format at 24 bits. I don't want to bypass the effects plugins, and I want the normalization off. Now it's going to come with the track name that I included when I named the stems, as well as the BPM and the key of the track. You can also include your producer name if you wish. Okay, so that's ready to be exported now. So I have 2 masters, one of which is an MP3, the other is a WAV file. I have the unmastered, the mixed down version of the mixed down wave, which is for the artist that plans to put a vocal on top. I also have the stems. So I'm going to right click the stems and compress those so that it gets put into a zip file. Whilst it's doing that, I'm going to go to BeatStars.com and upload new beat. For the untagged wave or MP3, I'm going to drag in the mix on my device. And I'm going to choose the mix version that hasn't been mastered. Open that. Going to upload the track stems in the zipped folder. Also going to upload the streaming version, which is the mastered loud version. And BeatStars automatically tags this with either a BeatStars tag or your own tag if you've uploaded it to your settings. I'm then going to scroll down, check the pricing, decide the genre. Drill is a subgenre of hip hop and trap, so I'm going to choose those. So it has 142 beats per minute and it's a key of C minor. Don't forget to add Beats for Love as a collaborator if you want to help out some of the causes that BeatStars support. If you have a YouTube video URL, add that now. This is something that I usually leave till later. Okay, I'm going to wait for that to finish uploading and then I'm going to press publish. Okay, so that's the end of this third and final video. I really hope you learned something today. Bye for now.